I've been curious about talking about like our personal experiences, what we've been going through with our families, the growth, the struggle. Like I definitely in the last few months went to some places of struggle with the family again and personally, and as it relates to the unschooling, uh, unlearning, path. Um, and I also wanted to ask like how you wanted to structure this, since we haven't done it in so long. You want to like take turns having a check-in and just go with the flow? I just want to hear what you guys are feeling.
I feel like it's nice to just go with the flow because it's been so long since we've done this, sort of just really more laid back, I guess. But yeah, maybe we can also think about moving forward if you want to explore. I mean, you just kind of pulled out a theme that we're going to explore this time, but maybe we can make a little bit more of a list or some sort of a framework for our next one. But I'm up for anything, so that's just what I was thinking.
Sounds really good to me too, Lisa. Yes. And thank you, Deanna, for your share, and also for this guiding theme and topic. I think that's really helpful.
Well, and I also invite anything else that comes up or feels relevant that might be off topic, like unschooling way. We don't have to contain it in a box either. But I think initially a few weeks back when I reached out, I was feeling like this struggle, this journey would be, it's so real and raw, and it would, that those dips back into uncertainty and then out of uncertainty, and like, I mean, that is no matter what path we take, like this spiraling path that happens. But in this context, I just thought it would be so helpful for people to see a real process and how we move through this, kind of like in relationships, long-term relationships, like with Fred and I, it goes great, and then there are the struggles and it doesn't go great, and then coming, and that's the reality. And knowing that, like, knowing the reality of unschooling can help people with their own struggles and not be so dismayed or hard on themselves when things aren't like perfect. It's like enough with the perfect world. We're all, I was listening on the radio the other day, Marketplace, and they were talking about job market and everything, but they were so much more humanized now, talking about how, oh yeah, I've been crying too a lot. This is like, when is this gonna, I'm like, wow, they're not just showy puppet heads anymore. They're real people. And so I wanted to kind of be like, hey, I'm a real person going through this process, and it's not always certain. I'm not always clear about what I'm doing. I'm not always 100% sure that I'm, that unschooling is right, or that I'm doing it right. And then, looking at my own judgments about myself and being kind and compassionate, like this whole journey I've been spiraling through, clearing those biases, clearing those, like, self-criticisms and being hard on myself. And like, it was really hard. We dipped back into a place where, with this quarantine, being much more isolated than we used to, leaves the kids really lonely and especially when we get sick, or when when their friends are sick and we can't get together. And then, or when I start to dive more into work, and then like just this balance of being so super present for the kids, not disassociating and like being overwhelmed, like this whole, it was really messy. I got into a really dark place of like, I don't know if it was despair or doomsday or just depressed of like the way things are. And and just, I just want to say that all I did was just surrender to being in that place. Like there was nothing I could do but be like, I'm here. I don't know what to do. I'm not happy. I'm worried about the kids, yada yada yada. And then somehow, because I'm maybe conscious and keep working on it or something, I come out of it and then find a way to focus the kids on something. I don't remember what I did 3 weeks ago. It's kind of a blur, but right now what we're doing is I got like daily planners that I like researched to find good ones that had like, I found one for Charlotte that even has water, like check off that you've taken your water, because for her it's like drink. And so the having inspiration, and like this morning we did our daily ritual, and and doing it just with Charlotte, and she's gotten into doing haikus, and that's what she wrote in that little notes section on the daily planner. And so now I'm in a place of like, okay, the energy's moving, I'm feeling more focused, but I really was in a really shitty, scary kind of place for a little while. I wish I could remember more specifically what that was like, because I really wanted to share that reality to illuminate it and normalize it.
Yeah.
And it's not always normal for everybody. I know some people have their shit together and they're not like all over the place like I am sometimes. So there's that too. But for the people who aren't, hello, we can get through this.
I don't think I know one person. I don't think I've ever met one person who has their shit together.
There's always something at different times. But yeah, there are people who we all have our different strengths.
I have something to share. I'm sure there's just a lot bubbling in all of us. But as you were speaking, Deanna, what I was reminded of actually was Pam Lurikia's book. And she began that book. I know she has a few. I don't have it right handy here, but it's the book where she talks about the mythological hero's journey.
The unschooling journey.
Yes, the unschooling journey. That's the title, correct. And she really centers that experience of moving through life, in the richness of life, in the dark and the light and all that shows, right? And that this unschooling journey itself is like a hero's journey in the sense that we will come across our own obstacle self, right? Our own conditioned self. We will come across the culture's conditioning and the barrier that it creates for this journey to be more smoothly or more full of lightness. That the hero's journey of the unschooling life is really an internal quest to trust. I think that that's what she ends, right? It's like, this journey is a journey towards trust, which is more, I feel like when I read that, it really connected me more to a mythological, a mystic kind of journey. But it's also a very practical thing to understand, right? That to shift ourselves from the place of, as you named, the perfection, the search for perfection, the search for it to look a certain way, that this journey itself is a request and an invitation to shift, to like really let go of those chains and be in that unknown for a while. And to trust that something is there for us. Like, of course, we're talking about our families. Of course, we're talking about unschooling the children. But the real truth journey is us. Our journey to trust. And then it's the experiencing of how those transformations that we go through within that darkness that you are naming, within the lightness, when we have really joyous moments like one that Lisa shared with Leaf over text, right? That through all of that, our relationship to a journey into trust can anchor us and ripple to the family. And so that's sort of like the more theoretical piece that I wanted to share from my learning through Pamela Riccia's journey and experience. And then just more bringing it to like practical experience and what that has been like for me. This journey to trust for me actually was the opening call. It was like an opening call for myself to explore something new. That prior to entering into the unschooling journey as I'm living it right now, everything was obstacles. Like I felt like I had to control the whole experience of how this family was living. Like I had to have my grip on the schedule. I had to have my grip on when people slept, when people woke up. I had to have my grip on what people were eating. And what I realized that happened to me is that I could not see outside of that, both in how we were relating, but also in terms of time. Like all of a sudden, that took all of my time. Having to hold this grip and this management, right? I would call that the management. That just took all my time. And so when I really said, and this goes back about 2 years ago, 3 years ago, when I really said, okay, I need to make a shift. This is not feeling good to any of us. I recall that there was a moment where I felt this beautiful invitation to explore myself in a new way. Like I was watching the kids engage with this new time where they weren't being controlled as much, right? Where the grip wasn't as intense on them. And I observed them in that freedom a little bit more. And it was really fascinating to see how they were choosing to use their time. And so that was an invitation to me of like, oh, how do I want to use my time? And so just to wrap this point up, like in a more practical sense, what has happened for me is that it became evident that I had to engage in deep work and deep healing work for myself. It became evident that my relationship with my family was not healthy because I was not healthy. And unschooling just sort of set the stage for that. But the real work, I had to really engage. So my unschooling journey personally was, I need to engage in my own self-care, my own healing. And that took its own journey. And so now I feel like it's because I've experienced this healing. It's because I've worked so hard on shifting my perspective. It's because I have constantly been on this practice of trust, that when I'm faced with these moments of distrust, of questioning, of darkness that you name, Diana, my return is a little smoother. Like I can find the resource back. I can resource back to myself again to find a path forward. And I love the way that you shared your example. That was really beautiful. And I appreciate that so much, because that is exactly what this looks like, right? That it's not that the darkness won't show, but it's the how you are with it, how you undo yourself in it and resource again, and then find a new path forward and try something new, or bring a new breath to the family, an invitation to the family. But it really starts, and I commend you. You know, I know that you've been doing work. So I affirm that when you said that it is because, maybe it is because of all the awareness and work that you do for yourself. Yes, sister, it is. I want to affirm that and celebrate that, because I recall what it was like when I wasn't in that space of resource, of self-resource and healing. It was dark, and I could revert back to some patterns that were very unhealthy in my relationship with my family. And since then, the healing has expanded to each of us in different ways. And so now we're at this like new embryonic fluid. Yeah, did I pronounce that correctly? We're in this embryonic fluid, in this placenta of like our stage that we are right now in terms of our schooling journeys. Like we're in the placenta right now, just nourishing ourselves from what is here, what the possibilities are. And then when we come out of that stage, I feel like we'll engage with our own creative energy in new ways. But like right now, we're still, we're just coming out of like a real deep healing. We're coming out of like rearranging our relationships, like one of our members of our family needing, a lot of support to go from depression and anxiety to a space of trust and ability and capacity. Another member feeling, some other social anxiety stuff. And, so we're in this stage where it really feels like the placenta is necessary. And all of us are adjusting to the needs of the other within that space. And so that's the container that I protect. Like when I see, like, what is my work right now is to ensure that that container can be stable while we all do that. Yeah. So I don't know if I took it in a different direction, but just to say that is the beauty of the journey, is having to get to that point where it's just like, you don't know what you're doing. And I can share more specifically later, just some examples of what that looks like. I know this was a little bit more in the general sphere, but I do appreciate the example that you shared, Diana.
Thanks for sharing that. And I feel like I can just like, yes to everything you said. I was thinking, especially during this pandemic and like, relating to what you're saying, Diana, I think for me, like I've been feeling that too. And like, the thing that comes in my mind is sort of like, this isn't how I thought this was going to look, which is also, you mentioned that too, Maria, but I think particularly now with the pandemic and, our really thriving, vibrant community sort of just dissolved, and we've all been, you know, really isolated and in like really small groups, which, you know, ironically, that's sort of like what people think about when they hear homeschooling. You know, they imagine these families just sticking together with their mom, and like that's what they do, and that's so contrary to how our life was, you know, before the pandemic. There was just so much to do, and, you know, we spent so much time in community and with people. And I think yeah, like I have been feeling really lonely, and also, like, you know, sad for the kids, like you're saying, like, how is this good for them? But the truth is, they seem like very well adjusted to it. Like, again, it's more me who has these feelings of like, this isn't what I imagined, like this isn't right. And I think, like you said, Maria, it's sort of like we have to trust that it's all going to be okay, because everybody's going through this pandemic, whether they go to school or don't go to school, and it's turned everyone's lives on their head. But I think, you know, already being in an very alternative path of life with our children that you're kind of just getting comfortable with, and then for it to change so drastically, you know, it's like, you know, the deschooling never ends, but sometimes you think it does. Like, every once in a while you get to the sweet spot where you're like, I figured it out, like I'm not resisting anything, and then something happens and you realize how much you're resisting and how much you're not accepting, and there's all that work of coming to a place of acceptance. And sometimes it can be graceful, and other times it's really not. It's very dark, and yeah, it feels like it takes longer than you want it to. But right, like with doing work and with healing, it's hopefully the way you move through it is a little bit more graceful, or there's a little bit more ease, or maybe you notice it coming up before you're already in it, so that you have more of those, you know, big full times where you are accepting and you are trusting, like that whatever is happening, everything's gonna be okay. Because I think yeah, the pandemic has been so strange that sometimes I think, why did I do this unschooling thing again? Like, why did I but I think, right, everybody's sort of isolated and cut off from their support systems, and yeah, it's just a lot of uncertainty, no matter what. Yeah.
Thank you. I have been making notes in the chat because of all the really great stuff you guys have been pointing out. And Lisa, you were talking about those rhythms of, like, it reminds me of even just the fact that the kids are growing and changing. Like, you know, when they were 2, or, you know, well, okay, I got this, and then they become 3, and then like the whole rhythm and pattern and everything we just had it down is just out the window. You know. So that sweet spot, you know, changing the needs of what that daily rhythm or what we're giving, like, is required of us, needs to change. And then you know, sometimes I've gone kicking and screaming, and that goes back to what you were saying, Maria, and what we were talking about before, of that surrendering in those moments of, you know, if you want to call them darkness, but even in like a little hiccup, it's just like you can still feel that resistance to changing something, and or like it not going the way you want it in a simple scenario on you know, in a 5-minute time frame. You know, it doesn't have to be like a deep dark depression. It could be like we've talked about before, it could be just a conflict of wills, or what the kids want to do versus what we expected, and or vice versa, and then how we feel about them expressing their, you know, will so forcefully when we want to do something else, and like all of this that churns up inside, like you were talking about, Maria. But it's that work, it goes back to that work of that self introspection and looking at those, you know, unconscious, hidden aspects that of control or whatever, and letting that, or fear. So often our reaction, you know, in the world is a response to something we're afraid of, whether it's like, no, don't touch that stick, you know, don't step in that puddle, you know, in this kind of control of little, you know, scientific explorers' lives. and diminishing that sense of curiosity and going out into boldly into the world. But it comes back, you know, quicker, like you were talking about, you know, when we break that old energy pattern, we identify it and we consciously work with unraveling it, and then we can breathe easily and embrace, you know. I came up of new kind of a poetic image of surrender, right? Because people think surrender, I don't want to surrender, that's like letting go of control, that's becoming a slave, you know, the idea of what surrender means. But it's really surrendering our shackles so that we can just expand and out of this box, out of this prison, and out of those old patterns, and see new possibility, develop new habits of thought processes. And it does, we bounce back faster and faster. I mean, 20 years ago, when I would get angry about something, I would hold that anger and stew on it. Or when I got hurt, I would just, you know, like be in that space for weeks. In my partnership, like it's, you know, 10 years ago with Freddie, it would take 2 weeks to come out of an argument. Now it's like 10 minutes, you know, we work through it, we talk about it. We still have those big feelings sometimes, but yeah, it just, or when I'm driving and I'm thinking about something and I have this feeling, I could get stuck in it, but I'm like, okay, let it flow through and get to the other side. So yeah, there is that hope, right? That it gets easier. we create these new neural pathways in the struggle. But because we are growing, because the kids are growing, because we come up against a world that is doing things differently and are going to be faced with things that we're interacting with the world, we're going to keep coming up against things that require us to breathe and observe our reactions and be conscious and mindful and unravel and de-school and do things differently and keep coming back to this different that we value so much as a way of living in connection with our nature, with what feels right, what we've intuited and what has, you know, we're listening to this. But yeah, it's not always easy. And I guess that brings me back to like my intention with reaching out. You know, it's been a few months since we were, you know, we got into our own journeys, and I wanted to check in and, you know, just for ourselves to connect, but also to record it and share it so that people can see, oh, okay, it's not always easy, and there is a way forward and out, and it's hard, but like, yeah, you know, hard doing the work for anything we love and do. This life is not always effortless, but sometimes it is. Sometimes there's this beautiful effortlessness with being that connected to nature and listening to that flow. And, you know, this is kind of getting back to that esoteric kind of mythic journey talk the way I'm talking about it, but it is true. It's profound. You know, we're here on this life path. What is that about? And you know, this opens up so many questions and profound experiences being on this path, like in as it relates to personal healing, or like this mythic journey, and like all these threads in different disciplines, and the spiritual journey and my healing work. But coming back to unschooling, I think it really touches this at a really poignant level, this mythic journey. And it's not to scare anyone away from like, oh, woo, spiritual, you know, but it's profound, and it's an invitation to live deeply connected to ourselves and to each other in the family.
Yeah. I'm just letting that come in. Those were beautiful words and images, and that image and the poetic image that you named of the surrender was really powerful. Yeah. There's so many directions both of you named that could be so powerful to expand on and continue sharing. And I think that what I would want to convey, there are two important ones that are at the forefront for me right now. And I just really want to acknowledge that I sit in a place of privilege right now in my life, a privilege that I didn't come from and that I didn't always experience. But currently, we are living in, and I'm just talking about my family, in a space where my partner has a good job. Oh, those are so cute. My daughter sharing something. Thank you. He's stable, and we've gotten to a place for the first time in our lives where we're financially stable, and that for us means we can earn, cover all our basic needs, and put a little bit of money aside. That for me is the beginning of stability, something that we've never been able to do before. We are at a place where all our children have what they need, and we have enough in case there's something that they want, which, as my older two would say, didn't happen before. And so from that place of privilege, I want to say that when I speak about this journey into the self, there's a lot that we could say needs to be in place for that to begin. I think it could be seen in that way, that because I don't have to get up at 5 to commute and go work an hour away from where I live, because I don't have to come home after a long, tiring day to make sure that my kids are fed, because these types of stressors are removed from my life, we could say that that gives me the opportunity to explore more in depth who I am and how I want to be here. And so I feel like there's privilege there, yes. And I wanted to name that. And this morning, actually, I was sharing with my partner that when we got to live in Canada on this little island, just magical place. I was at my most stressed self. I had 2 young children. My mother had passed maybe 3 years before then. We were living in a new country, undocumented, if I could say that publicly. And it was a stressful time. We didn't have a lot of work. We could cover our basic needs, and I was not working. I was doing the homeschooling thing at that time, staying home. And yet we were in this most magical place. And I thought, I was so stressed that I wasn't able to fully immerse. Like, I did immerse myself into the space, but from the perspective that I have now, I wasn't able to fully immerse myself into that huge opportunity of living in that naturally magical place as much as I would. I was really just on the edge. And I thought, maybe I'm not immersing myself in this magical place that I'm in right now either. Maybe there's a way that I'm missing that as well. And so this to say that while we know that societal and systemic pressure keeps us from being able to have this space to dive in, we also know that there is a way, and many philosophers and thinkers, sages, monks throughout time, throughout many practices have named this and studied this and practiced this. There's a way that in whichever place you are, you can work to find equanimity within yourself, peace. You can be with what is. And I feel like for the first time in my life, I understand that. And so I sit on the seat of both this privilege, but also the hard work that I've done to be here and experience unschooling in this new way, which is from the seat of equanimity and being able to say, I can be with what is. So that was the one piece. The second piece, and I'm sorry to be going so long, is that yesterday, just to name an example, in the last 3 days, my youngest came to me to say that she had been sneaking her iPad to bed. And that she was staying up until midnight using her iPad in bed. And we just never had that practice with her. My older two stay up and use their computers in however ways they want. And it affects them in the ways that it affects them. But my younger one, I thought maybe we can, with her, work more diligently. And the word diligently really means I control how that goes, to be honest, to support her to not get into this habit of going to sleep with the iPad. Because I have seen how it has affected me when I used to, and how it's affecting my older two. Just metabolically, physically speaking. And so as we finally got to the place where we can talk about it, well, first she didn't come to tell me that she was doing this. I saw her kind of hiding it under her PJs. And I was like, oh, what is that? And she was like, oh, well, I've been doing this. And so point number one is that to this point, our unschooling has allowed us to have that conversation very peacefully and without shame and judgment. So that's practice number one, check. We did really well. Second piece is that unschooling number two practice was that then we can return back when the time felt right to discuss what she needed out of that. And what she needed out of that was to make a choice for herself, to feel supported while she was making that choice, and to be trusted that she was capable of observing herself to the point where she can bring some awareness to how that choice was making her feel. And so last night, there were moments where I was just like, well, my answer would be no. And this is why, and the research says, and what I've observed in my life, and what happened to me when I was addicted to Facebook, and when and I was staying up until 1 o'clock just scrolling, or what happened to me when, or what happened to your sister when she now can't go to sleep without her iPad next to her. Like, there are things that happen to us when we engage with this technology. And so I'm doing all this, I'm saying all this, but the truth is that the whole time, what she's needing is this: one, hear me, hear what I want; two, trust me that I can handle this, meaning I can watch myself and I can revisit this decision later; and two, stand by me without judgment as I do this. And what was my role throughout that whole time in that conversation was to keep me in check. I just kept me in check. I just kept coming back. Okay, now I'm going into this, like trying to convince her through the research, through like, I know better than you because I've lived this long. I've experienced this myself. And I have more knowledge than you. And I had to watch it and I had to reel that back and then open the space again, right? And so what I observed was her kind of feeling like, yeah, what I'm doing is wrong, to a transformation of just like, this is something that I'm curious about. This is why I do it. This is what it's doing for me. And I want to explore this and then trust that I can think about it as I'm doing it and decide how it's working for me. And that you're going to be there to work with me or to talk to as I'm exploring this. Would I have been able to do that 2 years ago? Absolutely not. Yeah, it would have been no, and this is why, in the end.
That's amazing. I mean, thank you for like listing out all the steps like that. I think it's really so illustrative of the process and right, deschooling, but also like just becoming more in touch with yourself. And oh my gosh, there's so many things I want to say. I guess one, I wanted to say how, the first thing I thought of is when you said, and you went on to expound on this, but you were saying how, I guess I just wanted to point out that you learn this for yourself by using your computer late into the night, right? And I just want to talk about too this like kind of cultural conditioning. Maybe dads feel it too, but I think particularly on women as mothers, is it's their job to sort of control what their kids are doing, but also to like preempt the mistakes by saying, well, I have this knowledge, and so I'm going to spare you the exploration and the discovery by just controlling and stopping it. And what I think actually happens with unschooled kids, like just like this process you went through for yourself, they're doing that, but from a much younger age, and they're doing it with support. So they feel very confident trying stuff out and seeing what happens because they don't have the judgment. They haven't read 1,000 articles about how social media rots your brain or whatever the title might be. They just are coming from it with pure spirit. Like, this interests me. I'm going to try it out. And that's pretty much like the end of it. Or maybe they have some sort of prediction, but they're very capable of deciding for themselves in a short amount of time what it takes us, as an adult in our 40s to figure out. And I think that that's like the most sort of remarkable gift of unschooling is self-awareness. They have a self-awareness that, these dark times, Deanna, that we're talking about, these, shadows of the soul, I truly believe it all comes from a place of being disconnected from ourselves. We don't have the self-awareness because we went through all the channels, through the schooling, through the conventional parenting, where there's this idea that you follow the prescription and everything's going to be great for you. It doesn't matter. And by following that, you're disconnected from yourself. You don't know what you want. You don't know what you like. And then we have this problem trusting ourselves. And then we kind of paint with that brush on top of our kids if we're not careful. And all of that work. So I was going to say the two sort of themes I think of, one of the major ones is self-care, which again, we're learning, and it's such a hot buzzword for adults, because when we were kids, we didn't learn to care for ourselves. In fact, we learned to totally pivot our own needs and wants, for our caregivers or for the people of authority around us. And so as adults, learning self-care in and of itself is hard. It's hard to meditate, and it's hard to give yourself time to just be, or try something like staying up all night on Facebook and then being like, that wasn't for me. We have so much judgment and it takes us so long. And so, yeah, I think one is we need the self-care so that we can regain this connection to ourselves. And so we can be more like our kids. And I think part of what's so hard about unschooling is we're constantly seeing them go through life in a beautiful way, following what makes them happy. And a lot of times I'm like, you know what? I don't even know what makes me happy. What do I actually like to do? What brings me joy? Not it brings me joy because someone else is complimenting it, or there's some sort of external thing, but what actually makes me happy? And I think the trying to figure that out can be sad and it can be dark, because you're like, oh my gosh, how am I middle-aged and I don't know myself? And it's sad. And I think, well, I know that, by raising kids in this way, you see how simple it is for them. And there's also a lot of grief with that. It's why couldn't I have been trusted in this way? Why couldn't I have been supported in this way? And then you just can really get into this place of mourning all the milestones, all the little teeny bits of joy and just experience that we didn't have, or we had, but we were not focused on it because we were focused on following the rules, or doing what you needed to get to be loved, whatever the thing is. And so there's this constant loop, which takes me back to the self-care. And like you said, Maria, the healing, where it's something will trigger you and you'll be like, oh my gosh, that makes me so sad. Or again, I don't, whatever it is. And you can go down that path. And sometimes you have to, again, accept or relinquish, surrender. That was the word. The word was surrender. Sometimes you have to surrender to it. But I think too, the more we go through these things, hopefully we're building our little toolbox, and we're figuring out how to get out of it more quickly, or accept it. I don't even getting out of it more quickly. For me, I think it's more accept it more quickly, because really it's the resistance. It's the not accepting of the feelings or the what's happening that prolongs it, whereas if instead you can be like, I'm feeling really sad, or I'm feeling really depressed, and I'm just gonna, and you go with it, versus I'm gonna power through. I'm gonna you can go through these periods more gracefully. But I think too, they're gonna keep coming back, and that's sort of a reality as well, because we're human, and there are continually new experiences that trigger you in different ways, and I think, again, for this pandemic, having a teenager in my house and thinking oh my gosh, when I was 14, I had so many friends, and I had this, social life, and I rode my bike everywhere I wanted to go. And I can really contrast this with this very small, and again, small seems like a judgment, but I can layer it on and judge it with what my 14-year-old's experience is. But then conversely, it's her experience as a 14-year-old is being 100% herself, 100% in love with who she is, not trying to be popular or pretty or attractive, or just whatever the things are that I know when I was 14 really dominated my mental space. So there's just, it's a whole different experience, and comparing them, again, this is part of like, it's like trying to not compare, and it's said instead accept, and then even celebrate things that, like, I think conventionally might not seem like celebratory worthy, but again, these kids celebrate everything, even like this idea that, like, oh, I was sneaking my iPad and I'm just going to show my mom. Like, there's a little celebration in that. You know what I mean? Like, I'm me and this is what I want to do. And like, it's celebratory. It's not from a place of shame or a place of fear, like, my mom's going to yell at me, or I'm going to be in trouble, or I'm not going to be allowed to have my screen time. And that energy and that acceptance and that self-love really just changes everything. And I think that a lot of times these periods of darkness are almost just trying to grasp at that self-love, or like realizing like how hard it is or how hard it can be for me, what seems really simple and easy for them, and I'm sure I'm gonna be working on it forever and ever and ever, because like I said, you get to this point where you're like, this is awesome, I'm so healthy, things are amazing, and then it'll happen, something will happen, and you go back to that place. Yeah, I don't know, this is this has been so fun to talk about.
I want to thank you both for just these poignant clarifications and illustrations, and I celebrate you both. I celebrate me and I celebrate our children. Just jumping back briefly, I didn't say this, I just want to point out, like, all of this, I love that analogy to the placenta, and that, like, whether you're an unschooler or not, right, we create this womb field with what we bring our attention to, and this container. And I love visualizing our unschooling, the family unit, and then the greater, our community, as this womb field, this womb that we are nurturing and gestating, birthing, like, and through all the cycles, menstruating, and this process. And then I also wanted to, regarding that, not having read 1,000 articles that you mentioned, Lisa, I'm reminded of reading about the scientific process, and how it states in one of the steps is to research so you don't make the same mistakes other people have. And that's what we're talking about as parents. I do that too. We're to digress a little, like, I am also being catalyzed, and they don't talk about this, at every age. I'm having a moment of being catalyzed into remembering and recapitulating experiences at that age of my own, right? And then the trick is not to project it onto them or to thwart them from having their own experiences or prevent them, like what you were saying, but in that every age, I'm having a moment of healing and expansion and reintegration and soul retrieval. And at 14 I had sex. I'm like, thinking of my 13-year-old turning 14, and like, I mean, God, so young to be so concerned with so many things. But then I don't want to judge that also with them. Like, if they're end up in social situations concerned about boys and concerned about the clothing, whatever it is, I'm going to have to then face that in myself and hold space for their own experience. But that, I've been questioning that scientific process, because this world and the challenges and the problems we face individually and globally requires out of the box thinking that if we're only looking at other people's past research and not going beyond that to the first researcher, the first scientist that didn't have any research, how did we get to know plants have medicine for us? So doing this listening and finding our own way is so valuable, and just being womb space holders for our kids that way, and for ourselves that way, to really navigate this new way, new experience, kind of isolated from the dominant mainstream. It's really hard. And my practice lately is just to be really compassionate and observe the judgment I have for myself, let alone my kids, and just really work with mindset to create a gentle and unconditionally loving regard for myself in this process, where I am doing this because I believe in this unconditionally loving positive regard for the kids, and trust in the power of their own beings, their own consciousness. So much gratitude. I'm want to just open up the floor to you guys. Any closing remarks? But I'm gonna have to go.
This was so beautiful. It makes me remember how much I miss our times together as friends and partners in these paths towards freedom and liberation. Thank you both for the knowledge that you have gathered through your own life experience. Truly, I just feel so grateful for your insight, both through the challenge and through the joy. Just feel really thankful for that. I celebrate also just the accomplishments of your own healing journeys. I'm just so thankful to know you through it all, through those beginnings and through the process. I think my closing remark would be to really hold our child self. And this is just what I really captured from your share, Lisa, is a child self that was wounded, or the ways in which we have wounded our children as well, right? That we hold that compassion that Diana is naming. And when I think about her, my little child self, she was very curious and really wanted to be here, part of this earth, and really wanted to connect with things and beings and rocks and the people around me. Like, that's part of my essence. And I just want to celebrate in this moment, and wherever you are, if this gets shared widely, I just want to give us all a chance to just conjure up that child, our child, and find the first memory of joy we can remember. And that could be painful and hard, but if we can find it, like, just to hold on and imagine it like a candle just lit for us as we return to that healing. And because it is important that we become bearers of that joy for our children as well. But we need to start with ourselves. So I really appreciate this conversation, because it just highlights so much the importance of this work. So thank you, Lisa, for really naming that and really holding strong to that idea of self-care.
Thank you all. This is so nice. I mean, and I think it just also reminds me of how important it is to be in community. You know, like again, this whole pandemic has been so hard for everybody. But you're right, it's been too long since we've done this, and it's just really, really, really nice to talk to you and hear how it's going, because just choosing to do something like keep your kids out of school and not replicate it in your home can be really lonely and isolating when everything around you is mirroring that this one way of being and this one way of going through it. So thank you guys so much. Yeah.
Thank you so much. You guys are so eloquent and naming all of these really deep, important pieces. And as you were speaking, Lisa, I guess I just want to say one thing to share out. And I love the invocation you shared, Maria, to hold that vision, that light of joy, and that connection to that inner child. And I want to add, reach out and talk to someone, not be just in your own head alone in this. You know, it doesn't have to be someone right in your community, but maybe you have a friend across the world that might get it. or reach out to us, even, you know, reach out to someone you don't know. Look up, you know, the online unschooling communities, and just share yourself, and someone will reflect you and hear you, and you won't be alone. On that note, I'm so grateful for not being alone with you today. Really
Yeah.
nice to see you guys. And I look forward to the next circle like this with the Unschooling Squad. And I look forward to getting together and walking in the woods, and, you know, continued health for your kids as you recover from COVID, and yes, holding and envisioning and celebrating the joy and those joyful moments, and surrendering to move faster and faster, but really connected and with awareness to those deeper, darker processes.